Good evening, everyone. So we are having today with us Adityanjee. Adityanjee, and we are connected through a group that is called Hind Punaruthan Sangh. So we both are members there. And Adityanjee is a geopolitical analyst and he has a very good knowledge about the strategic affairs. So we are going to discuss with him about the current G20 summit that was held in India, and we are going to look at the outcome of the summit actually. So please be tuned with us and you'll be able to learn a lot of things. So welcome Adityanji, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much indeed. Namaskar.
Namaskar, sir. तो Adityan ji, we have seen that the G20 summit has concluded and they have given a joint declaration. So there are five main points in the declaration. They have added the African Union as a permanent member of G20, and then they have announced the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, and then they have also announced about the multilateral development banks. So they are planning to make it better, bigger, and more effective. Then the one more highly concerned issue was for quite some time, that was the crypto. So they have stated that they will be creating regulations for crypto asset ecosystem. And now the reform in the international debt architecture. So these were the declaration actually. So they have said, and I have a couple of questions on my mind that I wanted to discuss with you. So the very first thing that comes to my mind, Russia and China, they both are the very big members of this G20. So they both have abstained from this summit actually. On some pretexts, they didn't come. So what do you think? What are the reasons behind it? And does it have any implications? So what is your opinion about this?
Actually, the situation is not like that. It is not correct that they abstain. They did participate. What has happened that the head of states were not able to join
Yeah,
for different reasons.
yeah,
In case of Russia, President Putin has been keeping a low profile in international arena
yeah,
because of war in Ukraine. He did not show up for BRICS meeting in Johannesburg in South Africa, and even in the Bali meeting, he was not there.
yeah,
He is also concerned about his personal security because he's target of assassination attempts.
yeah,
Also, there is a ICC, International Criminal Court warrants against President Putin.
yeah,
Now, luckily for India is not a member of ICC,
yeah,
but South Africa was.
yeah,
So for him to travel to South Africa for BRICS meeting would have posed a challenge for the host
yeah,
as well as for him personally,
yeah, yeah,
because anybody could have said that, he needs to be arrested.
yeah,
So for President Putin, this was a challenge because he is trying to keep a low profile. He could have come to India, government of India would have assured his security. ICC warrants do not operate, actually do not apply to India,
yeah,
but he would have been totally isolated on international platform. And nobody likes to be humiliated on international platform. That was the reason. And in fact, Russia was represented by Foreign Minister Lavrov, who
yeah,
participated throughout the summit. In case of China, President Xi Jinping decided to skip the meeting. He did participate in the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg.
yeah,
He kept it dangling open whether he will participate or not participate. And finally, it was China's Prime Minister, Li Qiang, who participated. So there was participation, but it was at a lower level, not head of state, but head of government level from the Prime Minister of China. Now, what are the implications? Before we go to implications, what's the reason China's president did not show up?
yes, yes,
Can
yes,
be multiple reasons. there's a domestic crisis, economic crisis going on in China. So
Mm.
he has to attend to that. Unemployment rate is in double digits for youth, actually. In college educated youth, it's up to 20% in China. Chinese exports have dwindled and declined by 14% as compared to last year. So there are serious economic problems. There are domestic protests. Actually, in the elders meeting near Beijing in a resort, the senior leaders who have retired, they had reprimanded Xi Jinping. The other reasons are India-China problems, border problems.
Yeah.
Also, his apprehension that he would again be isolated. He likes to be in the limelight.
Yes.
And it would have been possible with all the issues going on.
Yeah.
Of course, in G20 meeting, the host would have been in the limelight.
Yes.
Besides the host, it is United States. Xi Jinping would not have got the prima donna treatment that he's used to. So there are a number of reasons why he did not show up. It may be that Xi Jinping does not want to share India's glorious moment
Yes.
and seem to be supporting that. So by abstaining to attend the meeting and sending the prime minister, he's sending a message that, yes, we are not going to oppose. Well, they did oppose on a lot of issues,
Yeah.
but I don't want to be party to your glorious success on an international platform. What are the implications of it? Actually, in terms of substance, it did not do anything. Russia is quite happy that Russia was not mentioned by name in the joint communique, which is like 38 pages long, 83 paragraphs in the joint communique. There's a mention of the Ukraine war,
Yeah.
but there is no blame sharing kind of thing. There's no finger pointing at Russia. It says things like, that the territorial integrity should be kept for all the states. This is the era of no war. Use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible kind of things, which could be interpreted either way.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that Russia is quite happy that Russia was not singled out. As far as China is concerned, China did put some roadblocks in the beginning. China did talk about, why have this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and other things. If you read Chinese press, they say that India is using G20 mechanism for its own geopolitical, issues or concerns to propagate that. But in substance, meeting and the joint declaration has not been affected at all by absence of Xi Jinping, or for that matter, absence of Vladimir Putin. On the converse, if both were present, I think there would have been a lot of tensions. So they did the wise thing by absenting themselves and sending foreign minister in case of Russia and prime minister in case of China.
So I think India, especially our Prime Minister, was more than happy by the absence of both the leaders, because he himself was in the limelight. And he should have been, because we were hosting the summit.
I think Prime Minister would have been very gracious if both these gentlemen had come to the meetings. Like in Indian hospitality tradition, Atithi Devo Bhava, President Putin would have got a warm welcome. So would have President Xi Jinping. Having said that, their own level of comfort would not have been there in terms of their interactions, their body language, their, kind of, contribution to the conference, because attention would have been either on the war in Ukraine and Russia's issues or China's blocking of various agendas kind of thing.
That's great. So the second question that is on my mind, that I have learned actually today, because the critics, and I was reading an article from the New York Times also today. So they said, not directly, as I learned today, this joint declaration is not binding on the member states. Is this correct?
It is true, G20 is a consultative mechanism. G20 is just for collaboration, discussion, and consultations. Nothing is binding that the member states are obligated to carry through. And this is, the 18th G20 meeting. So even previous 17 meetings of G20, nothing was binding. This mechanism was created around 2008, 2009, at the time of Asian banking and currency crisis, when G7 grouping felt that in order to have a stable international economic system, it is better for the developed economies to sit along with the developing and emerging economies on the same table and exchange ideas. So the forum was created, and it is serving its purpose, but it is not like, a mechanism that requires mandatory obligation on on the participant countries to carry out the obligations. So it's a consultative mechanism, and we need to understand what is a consultative mechanism. It's not like United Nations Security Council permanent 5 or the other 10 members coming out with an edict or a directive that this is a United Nations Security Council resolution and it must be obeyed by all the parties. Now, even in that case, there are times UNSC resolutions are not abided by the member states. So in international arena, it is too much to think that all the declarations are binding, totally 100% binding on all the member states. And to expect that in G20 mechanism, which is only a consultative mechanism, there is no headquarters, there's no permanent secretariat. And as the presidency of the G20 forum changes from one country to the other country, everything gets transferred to the next person. In this case, it would be Brazil in 2024, followed by South Africa. So, a lot of onus is on the country that is holding the chair. But there's no secretariat, there's no mechanism. So we need to understand, not everything discussed, not everything said in the, declaration is obligatory or mandatory on the member states to carry on.
I see, I see. Because I consider myself a very common person, I am a layman, and I consider my audience also a layman. So I just wanted to understand a little more in simple terms. The New York Times also commented that I did today only. Like earlier meetings of G20, this meeting was also not unable to achieve anything, but G20 is required. So this was the gist of the article that New York Times published on this, the G20 Summit. So I just wanted to understand if the G20 meeting, even after 17, 18 meetings, is not able to achieve anything, then why this is perceived this G20 group is required?
So we live in an era of international cooperation and international competition. And what happens as demands of the situation change, new forums, new platforms are created.
Yeah.
So there is, a forum called APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation.
Yeah.
There are similar forums like that. G7 itself was a consultative mechanism of the developed countries.
Yeah.
Now, they alone could not handle the crises in 2008, 2009, because they also underwent, the subprime mortgage crisis. So it was decided at that time that since G7 alone is not able to handle the economic stability of the entire world, we need to have other stakeholders sit together. Meanwhile, you have seen that you have BRICS. BRICS was initially started as big and emerging economies. They are no longer, some of them are no longer emerging economies. So that's another platform. So you have this platform, which is a consultative platform. You can say that, all you discuss is platitudes and things like that. But there's a relevance to this particular mechanism. especially now with the African Union becoming a part of it,
Yeah.
it will become a single platform on which developed world, the G7, the global South countries,
Yeah.
and Russia, China, these are different blocks.
Yeah.
They are sitting on the same platform and are at least able to talk and agree to certain things. Actually, the New Delhi Declaration showed that. There was a lot of apprehension that there will not be any final communique.
Mhm.
There will not be a joint declaration because in the 3 ministerial meetings, there was no consensus statement. Similarly, in Bali meeting, there were problems. There was not a consensus statement, and Russia was pretty miffed at that point in time, the way the Ukraine issue was treated. Also, G20 is only for economic cooperation and consultation. It is not a forum for resolving geopolitical problems. So, you have other platforms. You have United Nations. You have, United Nations Security Council. For geopolitical issues, there are military alliances and blocs and things like that. So for us to think that G20 is one all and no all mechanism to solve all the world's problems, I think is a lack of understanding about the process. But it is an important institution, and it is an institution that will continue to gain traction and importance as you are seeing the global South's voice being articulated more coherently, especially with involving the African Union bloc, which has 55 countries.
Yeah.
If you look at the overall statistics, G20 actually includes 85% of world's GDP. It includes 75% of world's trade and 2/3 of global population. Now, with addition of entire African Union, you are adding another 1.3 billion people into this mix. So this will be, of course, it does not include entire world, which is not possible, but it includes a substantial platform on which world's economic problems can be discussed and mechanism be devised and some process be forwarded to follow.
Great. Thank you so much. So with this, I am coming to my third question. In part, we have already discussed since the inception of G20, how much it has been able to achieve actually. Is there any noticeable achievement of G20 since the time it has born?
It is again, there are sometimes you cannot put parameters. Critics will say, oh, you did not achieve this thing, you did not do this thing, you were not able to change the World Trade Organization's rulings, you are not able to, have any substantial contribution on the climate change and all. There are parallel mechanisms that are existing and working on that. Again, why we have to think when it was created, how it was created. There are mechanisms that are predating G20. And if those mechanisms have become, locked, they have come to standstill because of geopolitical problems and issues are not being able to advance, I think it'll be unfair to hold G20 mechanism alone as responsible for not achieving anything. You and I know that United Nations Security Council is locked. Nothing goes through because either Russia will veto or United States will veto, depends upon whose interests are being curtailed. And United Nations Security Council's, resolutions sometimes are not even implemented.
Yeah.
Can we hold the same critique against United Nations? It has been there since 1945. Same critique can be applied that it has not achieved anything. It is not able to prevent wars. We have illegal wars going on for a long period of time. It has failed in its putative aim, of having world peace and avoiding war. That has not been possible. So sometimes it is our over ambitious expectations from this new mechanism, which is only a consultative process, that it did not achieve anything. I think we have to see in more, less granular and more conceptual terms what it has been able to bring about. And unanimous adoption of New Delhi Declaration, which is not a simple document. It is 38 page long, 83 paragraphs. It is widely exhaustive. Yes, it is non-binding, but it is dealing with quite a lot of issues. So, and again, inclusion of African Union on the table as a permanent member. Last 7-8 meetings, African Union was invited as a guest.
Yeah.
In fact, in Bali meeting, there was a lot of anger on part of then chair of African Union about not being consulted and all. And at that time, Prime Minister Modi had said that, I will, give my guarantee that African Union will be included. So in a short period of time of less than a year, to make sure that all 20 countries agree to permanent inclusion of African Union as a stakeholder, as a member of G20 process, in itself is a big achievement. And having a consensus statement is a big achievement, So it depends how you measure success.
Thank you. So, do you think this G20 is still under the shadow of the G7? Because earlier G7 was there, and when the people felt some more the developing economies should be included. So the G20 has come from the G7. This is an extension of G7. Can we say that?
Not really. Actually, G7 were able to have their way in Bali summit. But in this particular summit, G7 grouping has been able to look at India's point of view and has been able to work to make this a success. So no, it is not an extension of G7, but it is an extension of process of international consultative process on substantial economic issues. G7 and G20 are not synonymous. One is not an extension of the other. The need was felt for a wider forum for economic consultation. Now, you know that World Economic Forum holds its annual, meetings, in Europe all the time. Why do you need G20 there? Because World Economic Forum has a strictly European orientation.
Yes.
So G20 is the only platform on which you have G7 countries, countries of the global south, and Russia and China, which are more or less now working in unison in an international forum. So all the three stakeholders are there, and it requires some finesse, some diplomacy to have a consensus statement and to have these parties seated on the same platform agree to doing certain things in future.
Is G7 still in existence? Are they doing any meetings or something? G7, or they are non-functional now?
G7 has annual meetings. They have their annual meetings. They continue to hold their annual meetings. So it's not that they are non-functional, but their influence is going down. As the economic reality of the world changes, the influence of G7 countries is going down. So India from 10th largest economy to, it went to like 5th, displacing United Kingdom. And in terms of purchasing power parity, India is at third number in terms of GDP. So there is a global redistribution of the gross domestic product as you calculate it. And from the current projections, India will continue to rise her economy and it might become $10 trillion economy. Now, $10 trillion economy may not have a place in G7, but does have a place in G20. So, relative influence of G7 countries on world economy is shrinking over a period as the stakeholders change. And the relative contributions of Eastern economies or developing economies or global South increases, yes, at some point in time, G7 may not have that much of influence, as it is already not having much influence.
Yeah,
World never, remains frozen or static, and one group of countries cannot always have the same clout or same power, and ultimately power is decided by economic issues.